exaggerated or misinterpreted. This is an important debate. We had a good debate yesterday, and I expect we'll complete this debate on Monday so that we can vote on these detention provisions and amendments relative thereto of Senator Udall, hopefully on Monday night. And I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Chairman of the Armed Services Committee for such a thorough analysis of the detainee provisions represented in Section 1031 through 1034 of the Defense Authorization Bill. This is a very important part of the Defense Authorization Bill, and I would just certainly appreciate what thoughtful analysis that the Chairman did, and I would say that his thoughtful and detailed analysis really addressed all of the red herrings that have been raised about these particular provisions, because if you read carefully the language in the provisions that were addressed by the Armed Services Committee, they do provide the flexibility that the administration says that they have sought in making the best decisions on how to treat detainees, particularly those that come, members of al-Qaeda, to our country to commit an attack against our country, to make sure that we have the right provisions in place to protect Americans and the flexibility so that executive branch officials are able to decide what is the best track to handle a particular case or member of al-Qaeda who comes to our country to, unfortunately, attack us. I would also like to remind this body that these provisions of the Defense Authorization Act were passed out of the Senate Armed Services Committee on an overwhelming bipartisan basis. And in fact, the entire Defense Authorization Act was voted out twice unanimously by the Armed Services Committee, including Monday of this week, where we again voted out the entire provisions of this act unanimously. So the particular provisions that the Chairman just discussed were the result of extensive discussions, not only within the committee, but also based upon testimony that we heard over months from military officials about concerns they had about the lack of clarity in our detention policy, and that's where we came to the provisions in 1031 through 1034. I would also like to remind this body that there were many of us who would have gone much further in terms of how we would handle members of al-Qaeda that come to our country to commit attacks against our citizens, or those who would commit attacks against our citizens or soldiers overseas and our coalition partners. I had brought forth an amendment on the CJS appropriations minibus that would have prohibited funding altogether for civilian trials of this same category of terrorists in the United States. This amendment, so I would have liked to have gone much further, but the amendment, I respect the amendment that the committee voted out, that in this instance addressed the administration's concerns of allowing the administration a national security waiver to decide how to handle these cases, whether they wanted to take a military track or a civilian track based on the national security interests of our country, which is, of course, what has to be foremost in these cases. And I would just again remind everyone what the problem we have here is. That the priority when we are dealing with a member of al-Qaeda has to be, who is seeking to attack our country, has to be intelligence gathering. We have to make sure that we give our executive branch agencies the tools that they need to be able to gather information to know about future attacks and to protect our country. So what happens now is our civilian system, if someone is arrested here, if they're in the civilian system, are given rights that are part of our constitutional system, which is Miranda rights, for example. They're told they have, if they are in custody and there's interrogation, they have to be told that they have the right to remain silent, that they have the right to a lawyer, they have a right to speedy presentment. These types of rights, well, incredibly important to our civilian system. When you have a terrorist who's a member of al-Qaeda, who is a foreigner, who comes to this country to attack our country, the first thing that they hear shouldn't be, you have the right to remain silent. We have to allow our executive branch officials the ability to make intelligence gathering the priority first. And this amendment allows that and gives the executive branch the ability to decide which system do they want to treat them in and to be able to prioritize intelligence gathering so that we can protect Americans and make sure that if someone who's a member of al-Qaeda comes to our country to attack us, we can gather information without immediately having to tell them, you have the right to remain silent. And that's what's so important with this amendment. It was a bipartisan compromise. As I said, there are members of the Senate, including myself, that would have liked to have gone much further. But we addressed so many of the administration's concerns that they came up with to make sure that they had, with these provisions, the ability not to have to interrupt an interrogation, to conduct the interrogation as they saw fit, to make sure that they could conduct ongoing surveillance, and to decide whether a military or civilian track was best based on our national security interests. I would just say one thing with respect to the transfer provisions and the concerns that have been raised about the provisions set forth for transferring detainees from Guantanamo. This is an area that cried out for some clarification, and it's important that the standard that the committee came up with is in statute. And actually, as the chairman mentioned, the reason that the committee addressed this is actually our defense officials did raise some concerns about what the waiver provisions should be from Guantanamo. Well, this has been an area of interest of mine because of where we are right now with the Guantanamo detainees. The reality is, unfortunately, 27% of those who have been released from Guantanamo have gotten back into the fight and are back trying to kill us, our troops, our coalition partners. And this is an area that it was very important to have clear standards where transfer would only be appropriate in the instances where we could ensure that there wouldn't be recidivism so that we could protect our troops and our partners from having to see the very same individuals that we had already in custody at Guantanamo. And so the provisions set here are very important to have that statutory standard for when transfers can be made and how they should be handled. In fact, I would add, when you think about some of the detainees who have gotten back into theater that we had in our custody at Guantanamo, they're conducting suicide bombings, recruiting radicals, training them to kill Americans and our allies. Some of the former Gitmo detainees, and I think unfortunately it's a little bit of a badge of honor now to get back into theater and to be engaged in fighting us again. Saeed al-Shahiri and Abdul Zakir represent two examples of former Guantanamo detainees who returned to the fight, assumed leadership positions in terrorist organizations that are dedicated to killing Americans and our allies. Saeed al-Shahiri has worked his way up to be the #2 in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and we had him in our custody, and unfortunately he was released. Abdul Zakir now serves as a top Taliban military commander and a senior leader in the Taliban Quetta Shura, again fighting us and our allies. And again, I'm concerned that in the world of terrorists, it's become a badge of honor to have served at Guantanamo, to have been released by us, and to be back in the fight. So I just wanted to put in perspective what we heard from our senior defense officials over a period of months in the Armed Services Committee why it's important that we have a standard that allows the Department of Defense under limited circumstances based on protecting our country to transfer the detainees, but only when we've addressed the issue of recidivism and they're assured that these individuals aren't going to get back in theater and try to kill American soldiers or our allies. And that's why this provision is in here, and I'm very pleased that it was in here to make sure that we address this important issue to keep Americans protected and our allies protected. I would just say that, again, this was a bipartisan compromise. The chairman very thoroughly this morning went through each of the issues raised in the Statement of Administration Policy. Also, in my view, thoroughly knocked down many of the red herrings that were raised about this provision on the floor yesterday by senators that are seeking to strike this provision from the Defense Authorization Act. And it is important that this body pass this defense authorization, not only these provisions, but also so much of the provisions of this defense authorization that give our troops the tools that they need, that we tell them that we are there to support them, to make sure that we move forward with the defense authorization, including these important provisions that address how we handle detainees. And I, again, would just like to thank the chairman of the Armed Services Committee for his leadership on this issue. I know that he has worked very hard in meeting with the administration, meeting with those of us on the other side of the aisle who actually wanted to go much further here in coming up with a very strong, important piece of legislation that will protect Americans and move us forward and provide some clarity in an area where we needed clarity to make sure that our executive branch officials had the tools that they need to gather intelligence, to protect Americans from the terrorist attacks that unfortunately those who are members of al-Qaeda still seek to kill us for what we believe in, not for anything that we have done. And we can't forget that. So I thank the chairman, and I would also ask Mr. President, unanimous consent on behalf of other Republican senators to temporarily set aside the pending amendment and call up the following amendments en bloc. That would be
without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. That would be Amendment 1179, Amendment 1230, and that's, Amendment 1179 is on behalf of Senator Graham. Amendment 1230 is on behalf of Senator McCain. On behalf of Senator Heller, I would offer Amendment 1137 related to the U.S. Embassy in Israel. Also for Senator Heller, Amendment 1138 related to the repatriation of U.S. military remains from Libya. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1247 related to further restrictions on the use of defense funds on Guam. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1246 related to a commission for U.S. military force structure in the Pacific. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1229 related to a cybersecurity agreement between the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1230, as modified, related to the annual adjustment in enrollment fees for TRICARE Prime. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1249, related to cost-plus contracting. This is also an amendment that I'm co-sponsoring. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1071, related to the oversight of the Evolved Expandable Launch Vehicle. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1220, related to a GAO report of Alaskan Native Corporation, ANC contracting. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1132, related to a statement of budgetary resource auditability. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1248, related to authorizing ship repairs in the Northern Marianas. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1250, related to a report on the probation of the F-35B program. For Senator McCain, Amendment 1118, to modify the availability of surcharges collected by commissary stores. And then I have to make a clarification on an amendment I previously offered on behalf of Senator McCain, 1230, as modified, Senator McCain's amendment on TRICARE. And I would ask unanimous consent from the chairman of the Armed Services Committee to allow the senator from Alabama to speak.
President.
The senator from Michigan.
Before the chair recognizes our friend from Alabama, just let me thank the senator from New Hampshire, not just for her kind and warm remarks, but also just for the great contribution which she has made to our committee. It's really been an extraordinary launch for her, if I may put it that way. I think that, and I know our presiding officer would agree with me on this because he's been a witness as well. It's been a major contribution. We thank you. You've had the kind of experience, and you are so committed to the security of this country that you are you're already venerable as a member of our committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're very kind, and it's been wonderful to serve under your leadership in this, on the Armed Services Committee, which I would say one of the great experiences in the U.S. Senate is that the Armed Services Committee, in a time when people see so much partisanship, we work on a very strong bipartisan basis to ensure that our country is protected. And with that, I would like to yield to my colleague who also serves on the Armed Services Committee, whom I have great respect for, Senator Sessions from Alabama.
Mr. President.
Without objection, the amendments that the senator from New Hampshire has filed will be considered to have been read and will be considered in the order that they've been ordered.
And if the senator from Alabama, if our friend would yield for 1 second, and then
Senator from Michigan.
We're then on the regular order. Is that correct?
The senator is correct.
So that the regular order is the 11
order.
McCain amendment. Is that correct?
That is correct. The senator from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would ask for unanimous consent to allow Commander Mike Moore, my defense legislative fellow, floor privileges through the final passage of S. 1867, the National Defense Authorization Act.
Without objection.
And I would just say how much I've appreciated Commander Moore's contributions to our effort to preserve and protect and defend this country, and he is going to be returning to the full naval service before too much longer, and it's been a great asset to have him on board. I do believe that the Defense Authorization Bill has been moved in the kind of in the way that more legislation needs to be handled in the Congress, and I am confident that that is in large part due to the leadership of Senator Levin, who is a professional, a skilled lawyer who knows the big picture and the small details of the legislation. It's been a pleasure to work with him over the years, and I've learned a great deal about our defense from him and how legislation is enacted. So I want to express my appreciation for that, and to Senator McCain, who brings vast knowledge of defense and military issues, and who is courageous in defending what he believes the legitimate interests of the United States are, and that's been a real pleasure. And I'll join with Senator Levin in thanking Senator Ayotte for her leadership, and her contributions to our committee have been immediate, and that's reflected in the fact Senator McCain has asked you to manage the floor today for him. I also appreciate your work on the budget and the effort we've made there. Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent to temporarily set aside the pending amendment and call up the following amendments in block.
Without objection.
Amendment 1182, dealing with Army Combat Brigade teams. 1183, dealing with the nuclear triad. 1184, dealing with naval service vessels. 1185, dealing with missile defense. And 1274, dealing with the detention of enemy combatants.
Without objection, those amendments are considered pending in that order.
I thank the Chair, and I would just like to share a few general comments about where we are. All of us have been confronting, whether we want to or not, I think some of us more realistically than others, the debt situation this nation faces. We are indeed borrowing 40 cents of every dollar that we spend. That is an unsustainable path. We've already had 3 consecutive years of deficits exceeding $1 trillion, and we're projected to have another $1 trillion deficit next year. The debt under President Obama has now increased by 42% in the first 3 years of his term in office. It's an unsustainable course. We've got to do better. The National Defense Authorization Act represents our committee's vision for defense in the future. We have done something about the spending problem America has. Is we calculate the numbers. We're down from $548 billion in actual money spent on the Defense Department last year to $527 billion this year, an actual reduction in non-inflation adjusted dollars of over $20 billion, which represents about a 5% reduction, 4% reduction in defense spending. Well, that's what all of our accounts should be doing. But indeed, that's not happening in the other aspects of discretionary spending, defense being the largest portion of discretionary spending in the Congress. The other agencies and departments aren't showing a reduction at all. Indeed, they're showing an increase. Even after non-defense discretionary spending increased 24% in the first 2 years under President Obama. And some think that the base defense budget has been surging, and it has been increasing over the last decade, but it's increased 84% over the past decade. I would just note that Medicaid, for example, has increased over 100%. Food stamps are now up to $80 billion this year, is 4 times what it was in 2001. It went from $20 billion to just about $80 billion this year. So defense has not been surging out of proportion, I would suggest, to the other spending programs in our government. In fact, been increasing even in this decade-long of war against terrorism at a rate that's not excessive in my view. It's been a pretty significant increase under realistic controls and not out of proportion to what we are concerned about. However, it is looking to be hammered a great deal more in the future, disproportionate again to what's happening in other spending accounts. The Defense Department now is working on a total reduction in spending of $489 billion more, which is about 10% of what we would expect to spend in the next 10 years. And that's because of the Budget Control Act that we passed in August that required reductions in spending in the discretionary accounts, and the choices so far have been to reduce defense spending far more than the other accounts. In addition, if the Deficit Committee, the 12 of the super committee members, if they do not reach an accord, we all need to understand that there would be an automatic sequester. And many people thought, and I think senators probably thought, that if that were to be done, it would be done across the board in an equal way. Not so. If that happens, $600 additional billion would be taken out of the defense, and items such as food stamps, Medicaid, earned income tax credit, Social Security, all of those would have no reductions. And so it would amount to almost a 20% reduction in the Defense Department in real dollars over 10 years. And it should not have been that way. The agreement should not have targeted the Defense Department in such a draconian way, and we cannot allow that to happen. All accounts need to be tightened. Every agency and department's got to tighten its belt, including the Defense Department. But not disproportionately so. Admiral Mullen said that if this were to occur, it would hollow us out. It could break the Defense Department and our military. So did Leon Panetta, President Obama's Secretary of Defense. He said it was basically an unacceptable situation, and he agreed with Admiral Mullen, who was sitting beside him at the time of that testimony, and in response to questions I asked of him. And when I asked him about it, hearing was on another subject, and he really responded with passion, Secretary Panetta did, and expressed deep concern about the course of our Defense Department if these cuts were to take place. I would quote, Mr. President, from former Secretary Robert Gates, who served President Bush and President Obama. Just a few days ago, he said this: "I think, frankly, the creation of this super committee was a complete abdication of responsibility on the part of the Congress. It basically says, this is too hard for us. Give us a BRAC. Give us a package where all you have to do is vote it up or down, and I don't have to take any personal responsibility for any of the tough decisions. So now we're left with this sword of Damocles hanging over the government, hanging over defense. And if these cuts are automatically made, I think the results for our national security would be catastrophic." Close quote. And that's what former Secretary of Defense, most respected Secretary, said just a few days ago. So I think that's fundamentally correct, that we are proceeding in a path that disproportionately impacts the Defense Department and would be damaging in a way that's not necessary and should not happen. A lot of these other programs have been surging out of control with problems after problems, whether it's Solyndra loans that were made apparently knowing the company is going under. Those kind of things we need to focus on, and to suggest they can't have any cuts and all the cuts have to fall on defense or a disproportionate number of them is a mistake. And I'm a firm believer that the Defense Department and every department of our government has got to tighten its belt, and we cannot continue as business as usual, and we should be having reductions in spending in every single bill that's coming before us. But I'm afraid, Mr. President, the only bill that will actually show an actual reduction in spending is a defense bill. And we got men and women in harm's way right now on guard to defend our country. And I feel that we need to get our act together. I'm hopeful that this Committee of 12 can reach an accord that would not hammer the Defense Department additionally from the huge cuts they're already being asked to make over the next 10 years, and maybe can help us begin to get on a path to fiscal responsibility. But I'm doubtful that they're going to make a big change. Hopefully they'll make some agreement, but it does not look hopeful that we'll have the kind of financial alteration of spending in America that's necessary to get our country on the right path. After all, Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said last year the greatest threat to our national security is our debt. And we're already seeing how it impacts us when you see these cuts being discussed and being threatened. Mr. President, I want to thank Senator Ayotte, a former prosecutor, Attorney General of New Hampshire, for jumping in right away into the very, very critical issue of detainees and how they should be treated in the United States. And in this short time she's been here, making a big difference on that. I was involved in it on the Judiciary Committee. I've been involved in it on the Armed Services Committee. I'm basically exhausted with it. I'm just remain flabbergasted. And I think you're right, Senator Ayotte. This is progress I believe you've made in these negotiations, but I think we've gone too far in many of these ideas already. And it just does not make common sense. Let me just say a couple of things about it. When a person is at war against the United States and they're captured and in combat activities against the United States, they are able to be detained. They don't have to be tried. They don't have to be given Miranda rights. They have to comply with the Geneva Conventions about food and the right to communicate and within limits. They can be interrogated. All these things are part of the Geneva Conventions. And they are to be detained until the war is over. That is so fundamentally logical. Why in the world would a person who's fighting an enemy and could have killed the enemy at one moment and captures them the next moment, they're then required, while the war is still ongoing, to release them so they can shoot you again and attack you again? This is perfectly logical. It's part of the history of war, and it's long been established that when you capture enemy combatants, you can detain them until the conflict is over. But we've had this obsessive desire and attack by some that the people that have been captured need to be released, and they insisted they'd be released. They insisted that they be released. And so they started with the least dangerous numbers and released, I guess now, a majority of the people that have been detained. And among the least dangerous members that have been released, as Senator Ayotte says, we now have 27% that have been identified as in the war attacking us now, and one of them is one of the top leaders in Al-Qaeda. And this was never necessary. And Guantanamo is a perfectly logical place to hold these individuals. And how it became such a political issue, and President Obama campaigned on it, and Attorney General Eric Holder was out there complaining about it. And then he gets in as the Attorney General of the United States, and they commenced to make some serious errors, in my opinion. One of the biggest errors was to create a presumption that somebody who's been apprehended attacking the United States should be treated in civilian courts. And I know Senator Ayotte just said this earlier, but people need to know, if you're going to try somebody in civilian courts, you have to give them Miranda immediately. Because when they come before the judge, if they've made an admission without Miranda, it can't be used against them. And you have to tell them immediately they're entitled to a lawyer. You don't have, when you capture people in a war, you don't give them lawyers. That's never been a part of the rules of war. And they're guaranteed presentment, the right to speedy trial in federal court within 70 days. They're entitled to a preliminary hearing. So all the other bad guys and terrorists now have an opportunity to know that you've captured their co-conspirator, perhaps, and are aware of the circumstances and may scatter in a way that you would not want to occur. So these are realistic things. So if there's a presumption, first of all, I would think all of the cases should be tried in military commissions if they're tried, and not in civilian, but certainly the presumption should be that they would be in military commission. Because if the presumption, as Attorney General Holder has declared, is that it's civilian, then you have to do the warning. I remember in one of our hearings, Senator Lindsey Graham, a JAG officer with the Air Force and still trains as a reservist, grilled, I believe it was Attorney General Holder, and asked him, well, what would happen if bin Laden were captured? Would you give him Miranda rights? And he couldn't answer the question. He wouldn't answer the question. Because under his presumption that if Osama bin Laden were apprehended, he should be given Miranda rights. So that's the nub of the problem we've been wrestling with, and we've had a lot of political rhetoric, in my opinion, to attack President Bush time and time and time again. They didn't conduct everything perfectly, but many, many, many of the attacks on President Bush, his Department of Justice, his military were unfair. Do you know that not a single person in Guantanamo was ever waterboarded? That the United States military never participated in that? These were intel interrogations done under limited circumstances to a very few people. Whether they should have been done or not, we can all argue and disagree. But the idea that the United States military, the Defense Department, was systematically torturing and abusing prisoners is absolutely untrue. No military under such difficult circumstances has performed so well. Mr. President, on another subject, one of my amendments deals with a subject that I had an opportunity to be engaged in for some years. Around 2002 or 2003 or 4, I led a congressional delegation to Europe dealing with the extent of our forces in Europe, how much we have deployed there, and the opportunity we had and maybe the need that we had to bring home some of those forces. We were going through a BRAC process in the United States, closing bases and consolidating bases. That process did not apply officially to Europe and bases around the world, and a number of us were engaged in that. I recall that Senator Saxby Chambliss and Mike Enzi traveled with us to Europe. And we examined and went to Germany and Italy and Spain, and we saw the bases that were important for the United States, bases that we really needed, and we had good support from our allies on, and would be enduring bases. And there was a plan in place to reduce the deployments in areas where it was less important. So as a matter of background, I would share these thoughts. Since 2004, the Defense Department had a plan to transfer 2 of its 4 combat brigades in Europe back to the United States as part of a larger post-Cold War realignment. However, in April of this year, the Department of Defense announced it would maintain 3 combat brigades, and the 4th would not leave Europe until 2015. Earlier this year, Admiral Stavridis told the Senate Armed Services Committee that roughly 80,000 troops remain in Europe. moving a brigade combat team back to the United States would have cut U.S. forces by 5,000 personnel. A 2010 plan developed by a congressionally appointed committee found that cutting one-third of the United States military presence in Europe and Pacific would save billions of dollars over 10 years. I do believe significant cost savings can be realized. In addition to these savings, stationing these troops in the United States would have a stimulative effect on state and local economies, with these soldiers and families living in their local economy and being able to stay with their families more easily, and reducing the number of expensive movements of personnel and families to deploy in different places around the world. So I feel like that we need to stay on track with this plan. A February 2011 GAO report found that DoD posture planning guidance does not require the EUCOM, the European Command, to include comprehensive cost data in its theater posture plan. As a result, DoD does not have critical information that could be used by decision makers as they deliberate posture requirements. The GAO analysis showed that of the approximately $17 billion obligated by the services to support installations in Europe between 2006 and 2009, approximately $13 billion, 78%, was for operation and maintenance cost. Now, those countries want our people there. It brings American money to their economy, just like we'd like to have a brigade combat team in Alabama, New Hampshire, or some other place. It's good for the economy. NATO and European allies, however, are not meeting their defense spending obligations. Many of our allies do not meet the EU standards, and the United States should not be continuing to subsidize NATO and European allies' defense spending. They need to participate more. I believe there are significant savings that could be found by bringing both these brigade combat teams to the United States, as has been planned. And I would ask, is Europe more threatened today than it was just 2, 3, 4, 6 years ago? I don't think so. They don't think so. Mr. President, the Europeans committed to 2% of their GDP to be committed to defense. But many of those nations are down to 1%. They're not even fulfilling their 2% goal. The United States is at 4% of GDP on defense. Almost. And so I think the Europeans need to be prepared to understand that they can't live off the United States. There's a great book by Kagan called Paradise and Power. Very insightful book. And it says, in a sense, Europeans are comfortable. Why? Because they're under the umbrella of American power. And they've been comfortable with that. They don't feel threatened, and they're not paying their fair share of the defense burden, and they don't like it when we want to bring home troops. Give me a break. It's time to do something about that, and I believe all of our allies around the world, whether in the Pacific or in Europe or in other areas of the globe, ought to work with us in partnership so that we can be most effective in providing some stability around the world. But the idea that the United States can unilaterally fund a security force for the whole world is unrealistic. It can't be sustained, and I just cannot possibly see how we need this many troops in Europe at this point in history, and I believe it would be good for our economy to have those troops back home in the United States. You can have the bases there that we could surge and meet any challenge in short order. But I believe it's the right approach. I see my friend Senator Enzi, and we traveled together on that trip to Europe a number of years ago to examine the bases that we felt should be permanent and the ones that should be closed. Mr. President, I thank the chair and will yield the floor.
Mr. President?
Senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would just like to give my thanks to the senator from Alabama for his comments about the concerns he has about our detainee policy and how important it is that we have the right policies in place to protect Americans so that we can prioritize gathering intelligence. And I also wanted to share in his concerns about what's happening with the Super Committee in terms of the impact on our national security. There's no question that there are areas where we can do much better and be more effective with taxpayer dollars on defense spending, but we can't subjugate our national security for our failure around here to do our jobs and to have courage to take on the entire budget and bring ourselves on a path of fiscal responsibility. So I know that the senator from Alabama has been a great leader in this area, and I appreciate his comments in that regard. And, Mr. President, I also wanted to just speak briefly on an amendment that has already been made pending that Senator McCain and I are co-sponsoring together. Over the last year as a new member of the Senate and the Senate Armed Services Committee, one of the concerns that I've had is that the way that we do contracting at the Department of Defense, my overall impression has been that a third-year law student could negotiate much better terms for the United States of America than some of the terms we've been negotiating for the country and some of the terms we end up with our defense contracts, where we're on the hook when contractors don't perform or it takes longer than they need, or we seem to always bear the financial burden of that, and that when you look at the fiscal state of the country and where we are, we need to reform that process. That's what drew my interest to this issue, and Senator McCain has long worked on these issues to improve our acquisition process, and I have great respect for the work that he has done there. So we have offered on the Defense Authorization Amendment 1249, which would prevent millions of dollars in wasteful contract cost overruns from the Department of Defense on major defense acquisition programs and help ensure that our warfighters have the weapons and systems they need to protect our nation, but doing so within budget and on time frames that contractors commit to for our needs to make sure that we have what we need to protect our country. According to the General Accountability Office in March 2011 report entitled Defense Acquisitions Assessments of Selected Weapons Programs, from fiscal year 2010 collectively, we ran more than $400 billion over budget and were an average of almost 2 years behind schedule for major defense acquisitions programs. Today, half of the Department of Defense's major defense acquisition programs do not meet cost performance goals. 80% of our major defense acquisition programs have an increase in unit costs from initial estimates that we were given. While there can be many factors that explain the cost overruns, the cost-type contracts have been a significant contributing factor in why we have these overruns, both for production and development of our major defense acquisition programs. And we have to address these cost overruns, particularly at a time when we are asking our Department of Defense to reduce spending. We need to get the maximum bang for our buck and hold contractors accountable when they don't perform to what we have contracted with them for. Make sure the terms of our contracts are good for the United States of America and fiscally responsible. And that's what this amendment would do. It would prohibit the use of cost-type contracts for the production of major defense acquisition contracts and limit the use of cost-type contracts for major defense acquisition development contracts. This represents the core investment in our nation's military. And as these costs increase, and as the Department of Defense faces the looming prospects of major budget cuts over the next decade. We've got to address this now for our troops, for our national security, and we've got to get this right. So I'm hoping that my colleagues, and I would ask my colleagues to support this amendment that we're bringing forward. And again, I would say on behalf of Senator McCain, who has done so much work in this area, that to reform our acquisition process and get this right is so important to what we're asking our military to do right now, more with less. So thank you, Mr. President.
The Senator from Michigan.
Mr. President, I would just ask unanimous consent to call up the following amendments. First, four on behalf of Senator Jack Reed, 1146, 1147, 1148, 1204, and a fifth for Senator Reed, 1294, and Amendment 1293, 11 Amendment, 1206, a Boxer Amendment, 1292, a Menendez Amendment, and then we return to the regular order.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. President,
The Majority Leader.
Reno, Nevada is a beautiful place. It's right below the Great Lake Tahoe, this beautiful Sierra Nevada mountains. It's really a picturesque, beautiful place. I was very troubled this morning to wake up and find that Reno, Nevada is in trouble because of a devastating fire. We have about more than 500 acres that have been burned. We have a number of homes have been destroyed, and the problem we have is because of these beautiful Sierra Nevada mountains, we get winds that are... Mr. President, could we have order in the Senate?
Senate will come to order.
Because of those beautiful mountains that are towering over Reno, we get devastating winds, and those winds are blowing now. Winds are at 60 miles an hour, and they're trying to control this fire. It's really ravaging. My thoughts are certainly with the families who have lost their homes and the thousands of residents who have been evacuated. The Pine Haven and Coughlin Ranch neighborhoods at this time have been particularly affected. But this terrible fire raging across these acres in Reno and Washoe County, we have fire crews from all over the region who are trying to stop this disaster, try to get this rampaging fire under control. The winds are so strong that helicopters can't take off. So there's a lot of help that should be available that isn't because the winds are so difficult that the helicopters, I indicated, can't get off the ground. I, of course, called my son Leaf as soon as I heard about this, and the phone was answered by my little granddaughter Nina, who was trying to explain to me what was going on. Her dad, my son, had been called to his best friend's home to try to help him get, he had been ordered evacuated. They have no water. Alfredo Alfonso, his home is, there has no water because there's a well and the electricity's out, so you can't pump water. But my son couldn't make it there because the police stopped him because they wanted no one coming into the neighborhood. They're evacuating everyone. But my son and his children, my 4 grandchildren, seem to be well, and they're quite a ways away from the fire. I, of course, express my appreciation to the brave firefighters who have been working around the clock to contain the blaze, and to the dedicated first responders who acted so quickly to protect lives and assist the evacuation. Mr. President, it's times like this that we understand what happens to local government when they have to lay off people. Firefighters, police officers. It's happened all over Nevada and all over this country. And we were in here, of course, as you remember, a week or two ago trying to get places like Reno and other communities in America some help for their fire and police. It was defeated, as you know. But these people who are working, they're shorthanded. They're working these long hours there. It's impossible to say how many lives they've saved already, but they have. So my heart and all hearts go out to the firefighters as they carry on with this difficult work to control the flames and protect the communities. I continue to follow the progress of this fire, of course. I'm available to assist Mayor Bob Cashel and members of the City Council and the Washoe County Commission with anything that they think that I can do to help. I support Governor Sandoval's decision to request a federal emergency declaration. The firefighters and the first responders are doing their utmost to contain things. So to Reno and all of Washoe County, they can depend on my support in any way that they think that I can help, and I'll continue, as I've indicated, I indicate for the second time, to monitor this very, very closely.
Senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, first of all, let me say to the Majority Leader, our thoughts and our prayers go out to the folks in Nevada, and we certainly hope that this emergency situation is rectified in the near term. In Georgia, we had about 400,000 acres destroyed by a forest fire back earlier this summer, and it's always a tragedy. Loss of property is one thing, but to have injury and potential loss of life obviously is very much a part of that. Thanks to these brave men and women that are fighting those fires out there, as they did in my state, to get them under control, and our hearts do go out to them. Mr. President, I first of all ask that the current amendment be set aside and that my amendment, which is at the desk, be pending.
Without objection. So ordered. The clerk will report.
The Senator from Georgia, Mr. Chambliss, for himself and others, proposes amendment number 1304.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to voice my support for the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act, S. 1867. This is one of the most important bills that the Senate considers each year. And this is the 9th defense authorization bill that I have been involved in drafting since being elected to the United States Senate. It sets funding levels and implements policies for the Department of Defense and provides pay raises for our men and women in uniform. After extended debate and discussion, this bill, which authorizes $662 billion for the Department of Defense and national security-related aspects of the Department of Energy, was passed unanimously out of the Senate Armed Services Committee. This committee was in a difficult situation this year considering our nation's fiscal crisis. As I have firmly believed all along, everything, including defense spending, must be on the table to address our fiscal circumstances. In the midst of intense budget negotiations, I am pleased that we can offer up and debate a bill that addresses the real need to reduce government spending in a responsible and calculated manner. As several of my colleagues have already stated on the floor, the National Defense Authorization Act cuts a considerable amount from the defense budget as requested by the President. It is $27 billion less than the administration requested and $43 billion less than the amount appropriated for 2011. These were very difficult decisions to make, but they were the fiscally responsible thing to do given our nation's fiscal situation. I am pleased that the committee was able to make these cuts without jeopardizing our national security. Given the unstable state of affairs around the world, now is not the time to slash important programs that help our military carry out their responsibilities. We still have widespread enemies and interests around the world. With this in mind, the bill authorizes $3.2 billion for DOD's Mine-Resistant Ambush Protected Vehicle Fund, authorizes $10.3 billion for U.S. Special Operations Command, an increase of 6% above fiscal year 2011 levels, and authorizes more than $2.4 billion for DOD's counter-improvised explosive device activities. In recent months, we have seen what a remarkable impact a small elite force of U.S. soldiers can have, and I am pleased that this bill authorizes a deserved funding increase for U.S. Special Operations Command in order to expand their resources, training, technology, and equipment to accomplish their missions. Along with funding, this bill will extend the authority of Special Operations Forces to provide support to operations fighting against terrorism around the world. Regarding our ongoing operations in Afghanistan and elsewhere overseas, the bill allocates $11.2 billion for training and equipping the Afghan security forces, commensurate with recommendations from the commander of U.S. Central Command, and fully supports the budget request of $1.75 billion in coalition support funds to reimburse key partner nations supporting U.S. military operations in Operation Enduring Freedom. I'm also pleased that I'll be leaving later on today, along with Senator Burr, heading to Afghanistan to visit our troops and to visit with our commanders on the ground, both from an intelligence standpoint as well as an operational standpoint. This is the fourth Thanksgiving that I've had the opportunity to be on the ground with our troops and to look them in the eye with their boots on the ground and tell them how much we as policymakers, but more importantly, we as Americans, appreciate the great sacrifice that each and every one of them are making, and how much we appreciate the great job they are doing of protecting America and protecting Americans. This bill also authorizes $500 million for counterterrorism capacity building activities, including targeted efforts in East Africa and Yemen, and fully supports the budget request of $524 million to support the activities of the Office of Security Cooperation in Iraq, and overseeing and implementing foreign military sales to the Iraqi security forces. Keeping in mind the strategic value of our nuclear deterrent and our ongoing need to modernize and maintain our nuclear triad, the bill authorizes $1.1 billion to continue to develop the Ohio-class replacement program, the SSBN-X, to modernize the sea-based leg of the nuclear deterrent system. The U.S. military requires the capability to counter a growing amount of non-traditional threats. In this bill, we strengthen our forces on the threat of cyber warfare and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and their means of delivery. It is no secret that American computer networks are the victim of attempted hacking from state and non-state actors around the world on a regular basis. With funds authorized in this bill, the Department of Defense will be able to better guard against the threat of cyber attacks. I'm also pleased that in this bill, we were able to focus on the well-being of our brave men and women fighting on the front lines for our freedom overseas, as well as their devoted family members back home that make sacrifices every single day. The bill authorizes $100.6 billion for military personnel, including costs of pay, allowances, bonuses, death benefits, and permanent change of station moves. The bill also authorizes a 1.6% across-the-board pay raise for our servicemen and women, as well as authorizes over 30 types of bonuses and special pays aimed at encouraging enlistment, re-enlistment, and continued service by active duty and reserve component military personnel. Our attention remains on improving the quality of life of the men and women of the armed forces and their families, as well as Department of Defense civilian personnel through fair pay, policies, and benefits, including first-rate health care, while addressing the needs of wounded, ill, and injured service members and their families. Let me also briefly address the amendment that I have just filed. I've been working for the last several weeks with my colleagues, Senators Isaacson, Hatch, Lee, Inhofe, and Coburn, on an issue related to the reorganization of the Air Force Materiel Command. Let me say first that I support this reorganization. It's the first major reorganization of the Materiel Command by the Air Force in some 60 years. I support it, and I think the Air Force's need and desire to make themselves more efficient and more effective, and for the most part, I believe the proposed reorganization will do that. In these tight budget times where we are all going to have to accept streamlined budgets and resources, some loss of jobs and positions is unfortunately inevitable, and I realize that. However, there is one issue with respect to this proposed reorganization that I think we are all having a hard time understanding, and that relates to how the reorganization may affect the Air Force, the way the Air Force organizes for sustainment of weapons systems. The proposed reorganization would take some of the key personnel who are currently helping to orchestrate these sustainment efforts and put them in a separate chain of command from their partners in carrying out those sustainment efforts. This is hard to understand, and in a time when our Air Force is working harder than ever and keeping their aircraft in the fleet longer than ever, it is hard to imagine how a change like the Air Force is proposing here will help sustainment of weapons systems. We're working with the Air Force on this issue, and we are still in negotiations. But this is an issue for which we have yet to receive a satisfactory explanation, and we have not reached a conclusion of this issue. I think the Air Force needs to clearly understand that there is a risk here. There's a risk that this reorganization may have some unintended consequences, specifically related to the readiness of our Air Force. This is serious. We have not seen any explanation for how the Air Force arrived at their proposed course of action on this specific issue or why they think it will improve readiness. I would also note that the way the Air Force is seeking to reorganize in this respect goes against some of the basic principles and recommendations of a recent, very thorough report on this specific issue. It is with these issues in mind that we are filing this amendment. I very much look forward to the Air Force's explanation on this issue and to having this reorganization be executed in a way that allows the Air Force to conserve personnel and resources, organize more efficiently and sustain weapon systems, and support the warfighter in the most effective way possible. In conclusion, I'm extremely proud of the hard work of the Armed Services Committee members and staff have done to put together this defense authorization bill. I'd particularly like to compliment our leadership, Chairman Levin and Ranking Member McCain, on the job that they have done and their willingness to work with members of the committee on our specific issues. Issues like the one that Senator Ayotte and I discussed on the floor yesterday along with Senator Graham and Senator McCain and Senator Levin regarding detainee policy, of which we have none at the present time, and for which folks like Senator Ayotte have given a great deal of thought to and have come up with some very logical ways in which we can address this issue of the detainees so that we can get actionable intelligence from those detainees and at the same time ensure that they are treated in ways that are respectful to our system of jurisprudence on the military side as well as on the civilian side. I want to also say that we've had a couple of hiccups along the way, but staff on both sides, both the majority and the minority, have addressed those hiccups, and we have been working very closely to try to ensure that the issues that we raised with staff after the bill was filed have been addressed and are in the process of being taken care of. As a reflection of the extremely tight budget environment, we have taken responsible reductions in spending. However, we maintain our commitment to the armed forces by providing funds and authorizations to protect our national security, support our men and women on the front lines, as well as their dedicated families here in America. I look forward to the remainder of the debate on this bill, Mr. President, when we return after our Thanksgiving break. And to all of our men and women who wear the uniform of the United States of America, happy Thanksgiving.